Welcome to Conversations. My name is Jason Plotkin. I'm the Program Director at Congregation Emanu, and each week we sit down with a member of the congregation, community, or perhaps even from the sports world to discuss the current state of affairs. One of the things that I've really enjoyed as part of our conversation series is being able to highlight our partners in the community. This serves as a great opportunity to learn more about our partners, how they've handled the pandemic, and perhaps a glimpse into what the future holds. So this week, we have an opportunity to learn about the Holocaust Museum Houston with the CEO of the Holocaust Museum, Kelly Zuniga. Kelly, welcome to the show. You can turn your camera on. And how are you doing today?
Hi, nice to see you.
Well, we are delighted to have you and really dive deep into anything we can in the next 30 minutes or so about the Holocaust Museum. So thank you for coming on. So while we're all familiar with CEO positions, our viewers may not have an understanding of the role of a CEO of a museum such as the Holocaust Museum. Can you give us a glimpse into your role and the various constituent bases that you work with?
Well, it is an interesting job. I never have a dull moment working at the museum because it is so diverse from the standpoint of the people that you work with. And so you're absolutely right. A lot of it is, of course, you have the running of the museum, on an administrative standpoint, but a lot of it is outreach. So outreach to all of our external communities, the Jewish community, friends, supporters, but also on the academic side, think of it from an international outreach standpoint, museums that we work with all over the world. Then you have the 8 Holocaust museums within the domestic United States. We all have partnerships with them. And then we have scholars. We have people that are reaching out to us with new books concerning the Holocaust or human rights or genocide. And then we have our own constituents. So don't forget the survivors are a big part of this museum and their relationships and their contributions and the research associated with their history and their efforts. So it really is a big platform to work in, which makes it so enjoyable.
So we'll get into the survivors a little later because I really do think that's an interesting component of your work. But now that we have an understanding of your current duties and the people you work with, I think that'd be interesting to share some of your ties locally, both through your education and your prior roles that kind of led you into this role with the Holocaust Museum. Can you share some of that with us?
Sure. I did want to also mention that, of course, the board, and so you understand the structure a little bit better, is that we do have a board of 32 board of trustees. And then we have 60 board of advisors who do not have a active vote, but they serve as our ambassadors as well. So I am the direct link to all of those individuals as far as operations for the museum, and I report directly to them. Then we also have the Holocaust Museum Houston Foundation. So we have a support organization through the foundation that we work with as well. But those relationships are really, really important when you refer to the educational community, because I have a doctorate in education. My orientation is toward higher education and secondary. And so we work with a lot of school districts here, more than 60 different school districts associated with the museum, meaning we're working with teachers, the schools, the curriculum specialists, all over the state, even outside of the state, about teaching students about the Holocaust and human rights. So that unit, those individual groups are so important because they're our direct partners. They're really, really important for us to build relationships with.
And before we get to even more about the relationships, I really think that all of us have forgotten what was going on prior to the pandemic. So what feels like forever ago, and I remember visiting some of your staff members in your location just south of NRG Stadium there off of Kirby.
Yeah.
But the Holocaust Museum had a major build out. For those who may not be aware, may have forgotten during the current pandemic, just because they haven't had a chance to explore, what were some of the physical highlights of this significant expansion project?
Well, we started the capital campaign, so you can get a sense of the time. We started it in November of 2014, and we moved in here in 2019 on June 22nd was our first operating day. So that period of time was completely focused on taking a current building, renovating part of it, and then also all new construction. So it took the former construction was at 21,000 square feet for the facility, and we went all the way to 59,000 square feet during that period of time. So that was a major, major effort because we had to redesign the entire museum, create brand new exhibitions. We even added an exhibition. Now we have a permanent human rights exhibition space. We have a new gallery, the Samuel Bach Gallery, where we've received over 130 paintings from Samuel Bach. So that is a new educational platform for us, learning about the Holocaust through art. We have a new performance hall that seats 187 individuals. So again, giving us just incredible outreach capability that we never had before.
Speaking about the outreach, you brought this up earlier with all the school districts.
Mhm.
One of the main roles of the Holocaust Museum is a significant focus on educating future generations about genocide, but also the atrocities of the Holocaust.
Mhm.
With the expansion, explain some of the things you're able to do to expand the outreach of education.
It's really interesting because we have capability through video now that we never had before. The testimonies, the distribution of oral testimonies, the ability to research through our online databases and learn about those stories. We have the USC Shoah Dimensions and Testimony with Bill Morgan, where you ask him a question and he responds in kind directly. We have interactive technologies that we never had access to before through diaries, learning about the Holocaust through diaries of children that were teens at that point of time to learn about their perspectives, but also genocides and current day genocide. So the resources that we have that we didn't have before are just tremendous. And a lot of it is, like you said, it's tailored towards digital access, but also now with the pandemic, the students can't visit the museum. And so what we've done is professionally filmed with our educators walking through the galleries and given them the opportunity through Zoom, like we're doing right now, to view the gallery and then interact with a docent during that experience. So we're very, very pleased about that. We spent a lot of time in July investing in the capability of doing that because we were targeted to have 100,000 students come through our museum last year prior to the pandemic. So we want to make sure that no student misses this opportunity to learn about those lessons of the Holocaust at any age. And so really now we're opening that up in different ways that we never had before.
So you mentioned the pandemic, and I don't think any week we have a conversation we can go without mentioning the pandemic. I think we're all living in it. We all understand the challenge it's given us. But one of the things I always like to explore, because I think regardless of whether you're running a building, a social service, is a reflection on the decision making at the beginning of the pandemic, if you will. So there are obviously steps needed to essentially close whatever the business or institution would be, in this case, the Holocaust Museum, and not one operation is the same. When did you realize that COVID would become an issue? And what were some of the initial steps that you had to take as a museum to adjust, if you will, or change your operation?
It was really for me, you realize that we have peers all over the United States. And when I heard about Seattle and I saw what was happening to them, I anticipated that, unfortunately, that it would happen to us in the same way. It was just more of a matter of time. So the only preemptive thing I think I thought about was I bought every sanitation, supply I could way early because I thought there would be, scarcity associated with that, but and a hope that maybe it wouldn't get as bad as it would, in Texas. But yes, so we did plan ahead from that standpoint. And then, the closure ultimately, I think one of the most important element that I tried to be was being visible, being relevant, even while we were closed, communicating with our constituency, making sure that they knew what was going on. How are we dealing with COVID? How are we dealing with our employees? And we did have to furlough some of our employees, but we were very fortunate to receive a PPP loan that enabled us to rehire those employees. But I think that also just being empathetic, really understanding the needs that people have that work for you is so, so important, because this is I don't need to tell you how stressful COVID has been on families and units and every aspect of people's lives turned upside down. So flexibility, it was important to us that when we had the ability to reopen, we weren't the first to reopen. Actually, the Museum of Fine Arts was, but we waited a couple more weeks just to get all of our procedures in place, make sure everyone felt secure within our staff, and then went forward. So we have been very pleased with people willing to accept our standards, wear a mask, cleanliness, the extra investment we made to make sure that this facility was as safe as possible. We're following all the guidelines, and it's worked quite well. So I've been very pleased.
You brought up earlier, staying visible and relevant. I always talk about top of mind awareness and how it's important that people think about your institution when something comes up. So I think that's relevant. And that kind of pivots to my next question. You brought up earlier some of the things you've done digitally. I think early on, and I've brought this up both internally and externally, I think people stepped on the gas and went full in and really wore themselves out early on.
Right.
And they haven't been able to maintain that level of programming because of how intense they were. But I'm curious for you guys, because of the various groups you outreach to and then the role you play in this community, what were some of the priorities that your team had as it relates to the shifting online and the virtual programming and exposure points? What were some of your priorities to get to this is us in the digital virtual world?
Right. Well, I have a pretty dynamic and frankly, I think I have the best education staff in the United States as far as Holocaust educators. And they were just really focused on just switching all to virtual as soon as possible. We had already our summer learning program that was already established. We were intending on having close to 100 students here in the museum for this year, but they switched it all to virtual. So that student learning group, really was able to go through the entire summer completely in a virtual format. And then one of the other things that a lot of people don't know about is that we're an active participant and partner with Boys and Girls Club. And so we teach different units about the importance of human rights and the history of the Holocaust in Boys and Girls Clubs all over Houston. And so we took that virtual as well, so that we didn't want to stop the educational process. We were very, very successful in keeping that in place.
And then you mentioned earlier that you were the second museum after the Museum of Fine Arts. So one of the things you mentioned also is that you dove right in and got sanitary and cleaning supplies. But what were some of the biggest hurdles, if you will, besides getting supplies and setting up protocols that you had as a museum to become one of the first here in the Houston area to open? I mean, were there any, I know you brought up your networks, were there any models you modeled yourself after to get to the point of opening? What did it take?
Well, we actually had researched what some of the other museums were doing in the West from the standpoint of fog sanitation technique. that of course would be used in the high touch areas and every aspect of exposure to a visitor, like grabbing a handrail or, the front desk when they come in and check in, because, all interactives were, limited at that point in time. So you also couldn't take audio tours, right? So we really tried to make sure that the process of touch within the museum was going to be as clean as possible. So we found, some processes that for sanitation purposes work very, very well for us. And then also we felt it was important to test. So we were testing every week with people coming in, wiping surfaces to make sure that our facility was clean, and we've been clean every week. So I'm very, very pleased with that extra effort that went into really for safety for not only my docents, my volunteers, my front visitor staff, but the staff as a whole. It really makes people feel more secure. It's just very important for our visitors, but our staff as well.
Most weeks I feel the need to ask what has been learned during the pandemic. I think we're all learning new tips that we might not have been aware of, regardless of what the situation is, and things that might be in it for the long haul. Are there things that you are learning from the Holocaust Museum standpoint, or perhaps from museums in general, that are going to be beneficial going forward? Are there things in the last few months that are here to stay?
Well, I think that choice is here to stay. So your virtual learning through programs, it's going to be both. So when and also with the emphasis of being nimble, that is so important. Being able to pivot, being able to change your focus and still move forward is really, really important. You cannot be frozen in fear. You have to move forward. And so I think that we have adopted that, but also have realized that by doing things differently doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to go back to the way we were. It's actually more work. So from the standpoint, if we're doing a gala, it makes me really wonder if I'm also going to have the virtual element as well going forward when we go back to in person. But definitely for programs, it's so much fun to see people from all over the world participate in our programs, whereas they never did before because they were just in person. So it's actually fantastic. The outreach has really increased as a result.
That the hybrid model is really interesting, because I think we're all trying to figure out the balance of providing the great in-person experience and the great digital experience. But like you said, I mean, on Friday nights watching our services, we have regulars from coast to coast in different countries. I mean, it really is neat to see how people have kind of come together, taking advantage of different platforms.
And what do you do with that digital information? That's something that we just met as a staff. We're planning creative ways of outreach. So if somebody is tuning in for a Latinx exhibition discussion and they're from Nova Scotia, how do we get to know them better? How do we get them to become part of our community as well?
Yeah, well, that's one of my favorite things to do here, CRM and playing in the toolbox. So happy to chat with you offline about that.
It's fun.
But one of the things you brought up early on, and credit Sandy Lessig for making sure this got on my radar. A good friend of the Holocaust Museum, a good friend of Emanu. The Holocaust Museum has long remained connected and of support to Holocaust survivors within the community. Obviously, that number has dwindled over time, but the pandemic has certainly changed the playing field, if you will. How has your team remained connected and provided support to those individuals who are up there in age and might feel disconnected in light of the circumstances?
So one of the things that I did mention also, as far as all the groups, were the affinity groups that we have at the museum. And one of the most important affinity groups we have are the Survivor and Descendants Affinity Group. So these are a group of individuals that really are dedicated to outreach to our survivors and second, third gen, and having them involved directly with the survivor or with it programmatically in the museum itself. So one of the more fun things that we did is this, I love the survivors, is that, a lot of people think, oh, they'll never get on Zoom. They don't have that capability. And through a partnership with JFS, they provided, if they didn't have an iPad, they provided them with iPads and the technical assistance to get on. And so every 2 weeks, this group, it's called Schmooze with Zoom. And we have 40 survivors that come on every 2 weeks, and they do the programming. And we had Ziggy Gruber just 2 weeks ago talking about all of his recipes, and they're all telling him he's wrong, that they should do something else. And I mean, it's just so much fun to have them together. And of course, they're very isolated in this environment. So it's a wonderful thing to do for the survivors. But we do a lot of programming in person, as well as obviously through virtual with them.
That's a really sweet story. I really enjoyed
name.
that.
I love it. Schmooze with Zoom.
Schmooze with Zoom.
Great.
And final few questions. As a father of a Black child, and we were discussing this before we came on, one of Emmanuel's pillars this year is racial bias. And one thing that I like to highlight is work that other organizations are doing in the community to bring focus to hate and inequalities. If you go to your website today, there's a statement about white supremacy from both yourself and Carl Josart, who's your museum's board chair, of course, an Emmanuel member, and we've had him on this program before. But this is in addition to several programs about inequalities, BLM, and similar topics. For those who may be watching and thinking, this is outside of the museum's scope, it's a Holocaust museum. Why is addressing and educating on these issues a part of the broader mission for the museum?
Well, this is a shift that's come over time. It didn't start this way from the standpoint of the Holocaust Museum, but as any organization, it evolves, and there was a need, and the board felt that it was very, very important that in this new museum that we also had a dialogue that focused on the formation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the human rights movement as its own, as an entity, and the meaning behind that. But what's really important that people don't realize is that the human rights movement was the outgrowth of the Holocaust. So the two are very, very linked. So if we have someone that just is coming to our museum really to learn about our human rights program, or in this case, we have Mandela Struggle for Freedom, an exhibition focused on human rights, right? But at the same time, when they're there, they learn and they see the parallels that are occurring in those subject matter through the Holocaust Gallery. So it's actually a wonderful opportunity for people to see the relationship between those two topics when they're experiencing it in the museum. But also, on education, and we actually have a series, Dismantling Bias, Anti-Semitism, White Supremacy, and Inequality virtual lecture series on different topics of this sort, so that we are speaking out about the importance of human rights and the history of human rights, and of course, exemplars that have made the world a better place, and what are their stories, and why were what they accomplished so important.
Well, I really do appreciate you giving us some light into that subject, because I really think it's a neat aspect of what the museum provides, and I can tell that it's such a priority. So thank you.
Yeah.
The next question I have, and you kind of possibly gave us a good answer, so now I'm going to put you on the spot for another one, is I'd like to end with a takeaway or positive note. You brought up the schmoozes on Zoom with the Holocaust survivors, so I'm going to put you on the spot for another one. Is there another great experience or story like that that's really resonated with you during these last few months?
Well, I think, again, having Mandela Struggle for Freedom being the U.S. premiere, we're the first museum in the United States to host this exhibition. And its message is so important. I mean, what an incredible partnership between the Canadian Museum for Human Rights and the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg that co-curated that exhibition. But what a unbelievable message. And for us to be the only one first in the United States to host it here, I'll be traveling all over the country after it leaves here. But that message of hope, that message of how one person was able to make such a difference in millions of people's lives, and the importance of the vote, the importance of really believing in human rights and dignity and humanity. I'm very, very proud that we're able to host that for Houston.
Fantastic. And then finally, my last thing, I always like to put on my PR hat from my many years. Well, I still do PR here at the synagogue, but I'll put on that hat. And I really like to give you an opportunity to tell individuals how to get involved, with the Holocaust Museum. Maybe it's the programming, or maybe I know Emmanuel has quite a few docents amongst our membership. Maybe it's a volunteer angle. And of course, for those watching, I always like to put those links in the Facebook and the YouTube so you are able to click on them and explore some more. So feel free to plug away.
Sure. If you go to hmh.org, first of all, we would love to have anyone that's interested in becoming more involved in the museum, because there are so many different affinity groups. So if you go to our main website and look under affinity groups or under give for volunteer opportunities, you can actually sign up, and then you can come to our orientation, our volunteer orientation, and find out what is interesting to you. We also have positions that you can work towards becoming a docent. We always need docents. And we're looking for anyone that is multilingual. That's very, very helpful for us. So if you speak more than one language, come on over. We'd love to talk to you. And but we're always interested in finding people that are passionate about our mission and participating at HMH. So thank you for considering that.
Well, thanks for coming on this program. I really do think our viewers are going to learn a lot about the Holocaust Museum from watching this, and some of the neat things that are going on currently within the building, but also in the digital space. So thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate that, Kelly.
Sure, and I would be remiss, but I wanted to point out what's in back of me.
Go for it.
So you have to take a look at this when you come. It's absolutely beautiful. This is our Katz family butterfly loft. And what it's symbolizing are the 1.5 million children that were murdered in the Holocaust. So it's a number element associated with remembering those children that were lost, but also to learn about the story of our butterfly project that went all over the world, telling the stories of the Holocaust and learning about the loss of those children. And we had people make butterflies that they collected and returned with the goal of collecting 1.5 million butterflies. So guess what? We have over 2 million butterflies stored at the museum that reflect this incredible curriculum and story. And it's just a symbol of hope. And I think it's just a beautiful, beautiful artistic element of our museum.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and that background is obviously more meaningful and impactful than a lot of our Zoom backgrounds in this digital age.
That's why I just leave it alone, that it's there.
Yeah, no, you have a great background, and it's obviously a very symbolic part of the museum as a whole and its mission. So thank you again for coming on today. I really do appreciate your time being spent here. And then for those who are watching, of course, thank David Tanner, who is behind the scenes doing his AV work as always. Our next broadcast is going to be Wednesday, October 21st at 12 p.m. We're going to have Rabbi David Siegel of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism and congregant Emily Schaefer of the Emmanuel Votes team. We'll be talking about what our movement and what our synagogue is doing to get the vote out during the election. And lastly, of course, a reminder, in addition to joining us at 12 p.m. on Wednesdays, you can catch any episode you've missed on the Emmanuel YouTube channel and, of course, on our website. We will see you soon. We hope you have a great one. And thanks again to our guests for joining us. Have a good week.